we're live. So
Okay.
I hope you're ready.
I am.
We're
Right
like
now,
live,
start right
live.
now.
Yes.
Oh, hey, I thought you were starting. My bad. Hey, it's good to see you. We're glad that you're here. I wanted to take just a minute to recap some of the stuff that if I'd have had more time, we would have covered in the sermon. And this week, most of the weeks we've done this before, it's been I would have went longer on this point, or I would have tried to stretch this point out just a little bit. But this week, I actually skipped over a bunch of verses. I wasn't able to get to everything to cover all the stuff that I wanted to cover in the series. And the stuff that I skipped over was stuff about marriage and marriage with between Christians, and how we're supposed to get along and how we're supposed to cooperate. And it was just, if I got into it at all, it was going to be the whole sermon, and we're trying to finish this series up by Easter, and that's not a great reason to skip through that fast, but that was my reasoning. And so today we wanted to cover, if we could, Gabe and I, some passages, and just briefly, we won't be able to get super in depth with each thing here, but just talk about the overview of some passages that I think are probably the classic passages in the New Testament on marriage and as a Christian hanging in there and being there. And we'll start with the one that I went over. I skipped over last time. In 1 Peter 3, the first 7 verses of that, Peter talks primarily to wives. Peter's emphasis all the way through his letter has been for the group that's kind of less powerful. You know, the group that, in terms of the power imbalance, the group that is normally on the bad end of that. He's talked to people in their jobs. He's talked even to slaves. And he's talked about how we deal with the government. And here he's talking to wives. And most of Peter's concern is talking to wives, because in that age, words like patriarchy still get used today, but that age certainly was a patriarchy, and the men were completely in charge. The father in a family had fantastic legal authority to impose his discipline on his family, and the law pretty much would allow anything. And so Peter's advice to wives in a system like that is to submit to your husbands, so that if any of them don't believe the word, they can be won over without words by the behavior of their wives when they see the purity and the reverence of their lives. And again, context is important. The context of that time is important. When Peter wrote to slaves and told them to submit to their masters, he's not there endorsing slavery once and for all forever. That's not what he's doing. I think Peter's emphasis with the slave-master conversation is, if this is the situation you find yourself in, here's how a Christian is supposed to act. Well, to wives here, and specifically to wives who are with someone who doesn't believe, who chooses not to believe the same things you believe, who sees God and sees the world different than you do, he encourages them to be submissive there. And the word submissive sometimes can get misquoted too. It's just on purpose, letting someone else be in charge, letting someone else be number one. Jesus was submissive at the cross, but at other times where he could have used his power or his authority to insist on his way, he chose to turn the other cheek. And submission, biblically speaking, has all that in mind. And that's kind of how Peter started. And I was a little nervous about getting into it on Sunday morning in a sermon, because no one could respond. You know, as we get into this conversation, no one can ask questions. You just got to sit there and take it as I'm tossing lightning bolts off the stage. And so one of the benefits of a Bible study, and what we're doing here, is if any of you have any questions about any of this, man, ask, because we want to make sure we cover every possible angle. And like I said, with a verse that pops up later in this same chapter, in verse 12, where Peter says, don't repay evil with evil or insult with insult, he's not talking about every last possible kind of evil. I mean, if you're being abused, you should get the law involved, all right? If you're being abused, you should get out of there. And you're not being evil to insist upon that. Well, same thing here. This advice doesn't apply to every possible husband-wife situation. It doesn't. If a husband is beating his wife, she's not supposed to submit and just take that. We wouldn't endorse that as a church, and I don't know of any Bible-teaching church that would endorse that. It's more about the day-to-day normal behavior and how we act with each other, and that's Peter's advice. I know it was a lot, almost auctioneering that I was doing there, but I've asked Gabe here to kind of give me his insight on it. One of the what I have found about women's issues and marriage issues is that each generation seems to have a different take on it. I don't know if that's I'm proof of that. It just seems like it to me that when I talk to people who were 20 years older than me, their take on how marriage was supposed to be and mine were sometimes quite different. The generation gap really spoke to that.
Right.
And I would assume it's the same thing when I'm talking against what you did. So those verses there where he's telling wives to submit, I mean, what's some of your take on that? Keeping in mind that as men, it's kind of a one-sided conversation already. But what's your take on that?
It's definitely a generational thing where it changes, but it's also on how you're raised, because I see marriage a lot as, grandparents and great-grandparents would stay together even if they were miserable because you just don't get divorced. And then you enter the age of my parents and my youth group, their parents, of if you want to get divorced, you can.
Right. There's no no society pressure.
Yeah, if I'm not happy, I'm not happy. So many people are getting divorced. It's more okay. And it's not as simple as that. But you see that more. And then we're entering the next generation, Gen Z, where, they don't even want to get married.
Right.
Because they lived through divorce. And all their friends' parents getting divorced. It's statistics over 50% for sure. So now it's like, we don't even want to get married.
So the change would be, why would I ever submit? If I have to submit, I'll just leave.
I'm not even gonna place myself in a position where I have to submit.
Right.
If you're expecting me to do certain things and this relationship isn't for me, then I'm gonna find someone who is willing to take me as I am, without me making any effort to change or to submit in any way.
Right.
Because the submitting goes both ways, right? For
it does.
man to woman and woman to man.
Yeah, it does.
But even with all that said, it also matters on how you're raised, because Brittany, and she's very strong, but she was raised that you love your husband and you submit even when we might be arguing, when we might be, she serves me so well and she loves on me so well. And like yesterday, for example, we started redoing our bathroom, our master bathroom, and shout out to Brian Kelly. He spent hours out there with me tearing out floor and doing a bunch of stuff. But she had a long day of work too. So I came downstairs and I could have said, Brittany, I'm tired. Can you just, make dinner, take care of the dogs? I'm just going to sleep or whatever. Right. She could have said, well, I'm tired too.
Right.
Actually, she did say she was tired too, but she didn't mean it as in like, cook for yourself. I'm tired. Right. She's like, yeah, I'm your wife. And when we did our premarital, we agreed that there were roles that we took, and I take care of the house and do more of the outside stuff and clean and do other stuff. And she said, yeah, I'm okay with doing most of the cooking. Not all the cooking, but most of the cooking. Right. And in our way, we submit to each other. But she learned that from her mom, Elena and Doug, and they have that kind of same relationship too, to where it's like, this is what you do, this is what I do. We submit to each other by doing those things. Right. And it works really well for us.
Right. Keeping in mind that things could interrupt that plan, and life has a way of interrupting that plan. Just because, and we found that too, Julia and I have. For the most part, you do settle into roles. This is what you do, and this is what I do, and
did you guys talk about it?
I don't know that we talked about it a ton, as much as it just seems like our families were kind of similar growing up, and I'm willing to cook, but it's going to be a lot of fried food, a lot of grilled food if I'm cooking. So in the interest of our longevity, Julia does more of the cooking than I do. But we kind of settled into that thing. But the hard part is that life starts happening, and my laziness can creep in weird moments, or Julia has an expectation of things going a different way than I do, and will I adjust to that expectation or not? And you would like to pretend that you have it all figured out all the time. Everybody does. But life has a way of surprising you. Thomas is helping us with the sound today, and they just had a child, and that changes everything again. Everything that was settled and fixed is not settled or fixed once that happens. And
just like me, I just got two dogs.
Two dogs.
Kind of the same thing, bathroom. Right?
Right. It's the same thing. It's really a lot the same thing. And then again, Julia and I are in a different phase. As kids are out of the house more now, and grandkids are coming along, and we're in another chapter, and it kind of, this is more of a religion philosophy thing. I'm thinking about what you said about so much of Gen Z is not interested in even taking the risk of this thing. So why do you think, the way God set it up, why do you think the risk is worth it? And it's not just about finding true love. I mean, I think that's too shallow an answer. That may be part of it. I mean, I wanted to find that special someone who will make my heart go pitter pat, and that is part of it. I mean, it is, but I think God in His design, there's a bigger thing going on. Why do you think that God, I think, imprints this on us, that we just all naturally crave it? And then, I mean, why do you think that's part of the? I'm curious.
Well, first of it's the thing that you said that we all have it in us. That's why when God created Adam, He said it's not good for you to be alone.
Right.
Like God said, it's not good to do life alone because you get lonely, because there's decisions that you need a partner with, because you will get tired doing everything. I mean, think of single parents and how tiring it must be. Like it's too much of a burden to do by yourself. It is nice to be in a relationship with someone and being in love and having someone to have fun with and watch a movie. Yeah, sure. But in life, if I didn't have Brittany at home and we talk about things and I vent or talk about something that bothers me, what does a person that doesn't have that do? What do they turn to?
So, well, yeah. Well, I mean, we could chase that out a little. I mean, I think they turn to pride almost by definition. You have to start, I can do it myself. I'll take care of it myself. It isolates you not only from other people, but that pride starts to isolate you from God. I think there's something powerful about allowing yourself to feel.
Yeah.
And I don't know. So many of the TV shows and movies, I mean, that's what it's about how life starts to make sense again once you can feel. And that's kind of how we're designed. I really do believe that. And for that to work, you've got to figure this part of giving in to one another, about leaning into one another, trusting one another.
You said that the TV movies, the world makes it also seem like you're meant to be together, but I also see the opposite. I also see all these shows and all this music today coming out that's all about you don't need people,
right?
You don't need anyone. You can do this on your own.
Right.
If they don't want to yield to you, then forget those people and move on.
Right.
And I think that's where the danger comes from. There's so much empowerment from broken people that say, "Hey, I can do it. You can do it too." Well, not just because you can live by yourself and do it all on your own means that you have to, and not just because you did means like everyone else can. It's a hard life, and again, it goes to the beginning. God never meant us to do it alone.
Right. Let me give you another passage, and this is more for you guys at home, just as you're thinking through this stuff. The Peter, when he talks about it in 1 Peter 3, he talks primarily to wives about giving in and submitting, learning to be second place occasionally to husbands. Peter and Paul wrote so much of the New Testament. Paul in Ephesians chapter 5 kind of goes the opposite tack. Paul addresses wives. He talks to them starting in verse 21, chapter 5, Ephesians 5:21 to the end of the chapter. He talks to wives. There's a couple, 3 verses there where he talks to wives. But then most of his conversation is to the husband. And he really pounds away at what he expects husbands to do. To wives, and this is kind of important for his whole teaching on this section, Paul compares the relationship between a husband and a wife to the relationship between the church and Jesus, between Christ and the church. And he tells wives, the same way the church learns to submit to Christ, you need to learn to submit to your husband. And that verse, I mean, just in my own lifetime, has been abused to where husbands expect to be the Lord of their house like Jesus is the Lord of the church. Right. And I don't really know if that's Paul's point here exactly. I don't think it's Paul's point here at all. And when I'm doing marriage counseling, if a husband starts speaking up in the counseling about how his wife's not submitting enough, I know who the problem is with, and it's not her.
Right.
I mean, by demanding that, you're revealing something about your heart here. And again, the relationship between Christ and church is instructive. Christ demands that we follow him. Certainly does demand that. But for all the lightning bolts very rarely fall from the sky when somebody does the wrong thing. He doesn't enforce it with anger. He doesn't enforce it with violence. He doesn't enforce it like you would to a dog, as an example, or to something else. So you see in Paul's whole argument here this natural order of things, the same way the church learns to submit. A wife should submit to her husband, but most of his conversation is not that way. Most of his conversation looks at husbands, and he says, verse 25, "Husbands, love your wives like Christ loved the church. He gave himself up for her." Paul's argument is, in the Christ and church deal, Christ actually submits more to the church than the church submits to him. Christ has to bend further to meet the church than the church ever has to hope to get to Jesus. And I think there's a lot of truth there, and I think you can reflect on it and learn a lot too.
We have a question that says, what if the husband isn't of a mind to be the leader in that arrangement?
Well, okay, let's calling a spade. A lot of husbands aren't in the mindset to do that, and maybe even most husbands aren't, and to different degrees. Certainly, but
either like they don't care, like do whatever, or
right,
or it's not caring, or them being okay with the wife taking lead.
Right.
And I think that one's more of a hot topic.
This may take us longer than we can cover here, but Paul actually...
We can do part 1 and part 2.
Paul in another place in 1 Corinthians 7, which is another gold star deal for marriage in the church, Paul will use the phrase, Jesus said this, not me, and then later he'll say, now I'm saying this, but Jesus never really talked about this. And this will be one of those moments for me. This is Jeff talking, and I don't see a verse in Scripture that I can point to and say, see, here's why I'm right. It's not like that. It's just looking at the whole of Scripture, and I think that I'm a person who's Spirit-led. This is my take on it. So you should research and see what I'm right. But my answer to your question is, I think a lot of the teaching in Christian circles about the man being the priest of the home is not necessarily, strictly speaking, biblical. I think men should lead. I think that case is made in Scripture. I think men should care about Jesus, and I think when men lead, I think they feel better. I think it's a natural, normal progression to happen. But this notion that somehow men are standing between Jesus and the church as a avenue and tool for leadership and salvation, and she just has to wait there on her hands until he gives I don't believe that. I don't think that's true. I see in a lot of families, and I've been in churches here in Indiana and California and in Tennessee, and I've seen in many cases it is the wife, it's the mom that really fires people up. And even historically speaking, when Charles Wesley talks about how John Wesley, that was their mother that really lit a fire. I mean, she prayed for him every day, and because of mother's influence, I mean, they became the men they were supposed to be. Doesn't mean like his father was no good at all, but I mean, you see that a bunch. And even in the New Testament, by the time Jesus is an adult, we don't read about his father at all. Tradition, and it's just tradition, is that Joseph's already dead by that point. But it's Mary that's there for her son. It's Mary that is continuing, and it's Mary that Jesus on the cross says, I want you to take care of her. Tells his disciple, I want you to take care of her. And so I think sometimes this male priest of the home thing can diminish women. In a weird way, can make women feel guilty if they are the leader. And I don't know that if you've got gifts for leadership, then lead. Now if your leading is causing arguments every night, well, then we've crossed into a different deal. And Peter's advice in 1 Peter 3 starts to make sense. Don't win them over with arguments. Arguments very rarely win anyone over, but certainly men in relationships very rarely. So win them over with your behavior. Show them that the way you're choosing to live life is the better way. And by that he means love and grace and compassion, all those things that make faith attractive when it's lived the right way. Don't use your Christianity as a one-up deal. Why can't you be as spiritual and as together as me? And so they just sit there and wait on their husband, and they're stewing, and they're getting more and more mad. Why isn't he praying? Why isn't he leading? Why isn't he praying? Why isn't he leading? Well, no one's praying. I mean, he's not praying because he's lazy, and you're not praying because you're mad. And I don't think that's really what God was after, and I don't really think that's biblical.
If anything, in this specific passage, what I see, and I may be wrong, but I've been reading this over and over as you're talking. He tells the wives, to submit to their husband. And then he tells the husbands, but it's like he has to explain it much more to the husband.
Right.
Like it's almost like wives, submit to your husband. Okay. Husbands.
Right.
Here's why you have to submit to your wife.
And certainly that's partly because of the day.
Right.
When Paul was writing it, men didn't have to give in at all.
Right.
So what Paul's challenging men to do, when he tells women you have to give in, well, that was the law.
That's not a challenge for women.
Right.
He's kind of
right.
explaining, wives, yes, you do have to submit.
Right.
But men, you also have, that was a new thing.
I think Paul always had in mind, because you see it in other passages, there's no difference between male and female. We're all one in Christ, he says in Galatians 3. And I think Paul had in mind a more of a natural partnership than was common for anyone in that day. When I talk about the generation stuff, even between my age and Gabe's, and certainly between my age and my dad's or my grandpa's age, I mean, we constantly see more of an evolution in this thing, and I think it's been mostly a healthy evolution. I'm sure there's been some abuses here and there, but I think it's mostly been a healthy evolution. It's instructive that with Peter, he talks about wives and husbands right after he talks about slaves and masters. And in that day, when they were writing it, there wasn't a lot of difference between a slave's rights with its master and a wife's rights with her husband. There just wasn't that much difference there. Well, we're in a different world now. Slavery is outlawed in almost every civilized nation in the world. I can't think of an exception to that. While there is still slavery, it's outlawed. It's fought against, and wives don't have to submit in the same way. So you've got to think more about, well, what does Paul have in mind here? What does Peter have in mind here? Why give these things? And I think it's because there's value in giving in. I think when we do that, we start to emulate Jesus, and because he gave in. I think Jesus tells us more than one place, turning the other cheek is the right way to go. When you lose your life, you actually win more back in the end than you thought you would. Generosity always pays. You don't always see it, but it always pays. And it's that upside down kingdom that he really teaches everywhere. Okay, I don't know if I answered the question 100%, but I did want to talk about the husband thing just real fast. He tells the husbands to make your wife holy. To make your wife holy in verse 26. He says husbands ought to love their wives as they love their own bodies. Jesus, again, is our example on that kind of thing. He loved us. Jesus tells us to love our neighbor as ourselves. He loved us more than he loves himself. He died. So the Christian model for, submission is learning how to serve the other person. And that's what he asks husbands and wives to do. In verse 21, submit to each other, he says. Husbands and wives both submit. But he takes it further for the men. I don't want you just to submit for your wife. I want you to die for your wife. I got in trouble a few years ago that I was trying to be funny, and I get in trouble doing that. But I was making a joke about, Paul tells me to die for Julia. If the Nazis ever knock our door down, I'll take the bullet, but I don't want to wash dishes. And that was sort of the joke that I made. And I had a lady after the service tell me, speaking for women everywhere, we'll worry about the Nazis if you can give us a hand with the stuff around the house. And I was just trying to be funny. I don't really believe it. But let's take that line of thinking. Certainly, as husbands, you're expected to take the bullet for your wife if it ever comes to that. Certainly, that's true. I even believe when you're walking on the road, husbands should be on the outside edge. So if the car hits either of you, it hits you. I believe in all that chivalry kind of stuff. I think that's important. But the one who contacted me earlier, man, that's the truth. Dying to your wife is not waiting for some big heroic moment to show it. It's the everyday. Man, it's the everyday. And when a husband lives like that, one last thing on all this. The very last verse in this thing, I think, is a powerful verse. He says, each one of you must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. I think that's real instructive. That's where Paul ends it on. When a husband is laying his life down and just letting her know, you're the most, in his action, letting her know you're the most important thing to me. That's love, and she'll feel that. Whether that is you serving more around the house, whether it's you writing the notes or buying the flowers or date night or you watch the kids so she can do something. I mean, it's all the different ways we lay. And when you love your wife like that, almost always, again, it's not an always thing. People can be hard-hearted, but almost always she'll respond to that. Now, if she knows you're only doing it to get something from her, that can be hit and miss. But when you just do it, that's powerful stuff. And I think Paul's right. You got to love your wife unconditionally, even when she's not lovely, even when she's not lovable. You need to love your wife unconditionally. But for the wives, he says, but you got to respect your husbands. And since he used the word for unconditional love, I take it that he's meaning unconditional respect. And you need to respect him even when he's not respectable. And even when he's not always respectful. Men respond to that. As a whole separate lesson, a sermon once I mentioned I think men are praise dogs. I think if you will compliment, there's a couple of ground rules, but if you will compliment your husband sincerely on something that you notice he's doing and you appreciate, especially if you do it in front of others. Now again, you can't be making stuff up. If your husband weighs 400 pounds, you can't say, boy, you're fit. You can't lie, because he'll know if you're lying. So you can't lie. But if it is something that he does that you admire, and if you can't find anything about him you admire, you're not trying hard enough. We're all made in the image of God. Look around. There's got to be something. But when you pick something out and you compliment him on it, you praise him for it, especially if you praise him for it in front of people, men always respond to that. It's a secret of human nature. Men always. If Brittany wants Gabe to clean up after the dogs murder, she can't lie. But if she will go on and on about how good Gabe is with the dogs, I've never seen anybody who's a better manager of animals. I sit I drink coffee at the window sometimes, and I'm just blown away by how smart he is about this sort of thing. It will always make Gabe do it more. Even if, and this is for men and women, if the women know that you're only doing this to get me to do something, if the women know that, they won't fall for it.
That's what I'm saying. Are you teaching women how to trick their husbands?
Men can know you're doing it on purpose. As long as now you can't lie. Like I said, you can't lie. It has to be something that you genuinely think they do well. Men can know you're lying. And in their heart of hearts, well, I'm not caving into that, but it will feel so good to almost every man. They will fall for it.
It's not trickery. It's
how we're wired.
Yes, it's when we compliment each other. It builds a trust. It builds something between people. Right. When you say that, but it's hard to say those things without making it seem like we want those compliments. Right. Because that's definitely something Brittany and I struggle with. You mentioned earlier about how we are very unlovable, right. And Brittany loves me very well when I am very unlovable. When I had a rough day, when I am smart with my comments, when right. I don't take out the trash, but she's really good about still serving me, right. about still being there for me. And it's interesting that by her doing it, it challenges me. It right. makes me think, man, I'm a jerk. Right. She's way right. better at this than I am. And it makes me want to serve her right. more. So it's kind of by her being the humble one, it makes me want to be that as well.
It draws it out of you.
And I can attest to, when maybe everyone does, that when you don't feel appreciated about something, it does challenge you. The other right. day I spent 2 to 3 hours, taking snow off the driveway. And she made this comment. She's like, you were out for a couple hours. I don't even care if the driveway's clear.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We really don't want to bash on Brittany here on the video, but
it's mostly good.
It's mostly good. But same thing. If that's behavior, and she wasn't insulting you, you know that deep down, right? but if she brags on, again, Brittany, if you're watching this, I promise this works. Even if he knows it's fake, even if he knows you're only doing it to get in his good graces, if you will brag on what kind of a he-man he was to get that done. I didn't even think a man could do all the work that he did. I looked out there and I said to myself, I'm married to a dude. Something like that, right? But you got to mean it. You can't lie. It can be a little sarcastic, but you can't lie. It has to be something you really do think. That always works. I promise it does. And again, the hypocrisy thing in all of us starts to creep in. If I'm mad at Julia, I don't want to love her. well. I don't want to show affection. I don't want to do those things because I'm mad at her. Now, I will always, because I respond to respect, I won't say always, I will very rarely disrespect her someplace. I will. I won't. I mean, I'll think about it. I mean, if we get into an argument and we're in front of people, or if we're starting to, I want to get away. I would never want to disrespect her in front of other people because I don't want to be disrespected. But I might not love her like I should. And the same thing turns around the other way. If she's mad at me, it might be easy for her to take shots at me that maybe she would never do. She'll always love me. But the disrespect will start to creep out. And I'm thinking back again. I don't know who wrote the question earlier, and I'm not wanting to pick on anybody, but I think husbands and wives go in a circle on that thing. If I feel like you're not carrying your load, then I'll quit carrying mine, and which only makes him then carry less. And this cycle just builds on itself, and before you know it, I mean, you're in a much worse place than you were. And again, this counsel on submission, it really works. I mean, if it's what you said. When Brittany takes the lead and she loves like she's supposed to love, then in the love and respect thing, and it just builds. I might not be speaking to anybody watching this thing, but if you're in a marriage where the fire is almost completely burned out, when you start building back into that thing, it may feel like a lot of fruitless effort at first. If it's completely burned out, it may feel like you're doing all the compromising for a while. And there probably is a point where if you're the only one compromising, if you're the only one working, there probably is a point where you got to do what you got to do. And I understand that. I'll always be kind of anti-divorce. Well, I won't kind of be I'll always be anti-divorce, But I get it. It's a hard world that we live in, and I understand. But most of the time, people won't be able to sincerely say that I just kept trying. People always want to say that. They always want to say that. But if they were to really look at this love and respect thing, it'd be hard for them to defend it. And again, it starts with submitting. And Jesus is our example on that thing. He did it first. He did it first. He did it for you. He continues to do it for you. When you go back to him and say, I can't believe I did it again, he knew you was going to do it again, and he loves you anyway. And he shows grace anyway, and he pulls you up anyway.
Do you think we're going to need a part 2 for this?
We could. We didn't get to 1 Corinthians 7, and it's also worth talking about. So probably need to do a part 2.
Because we're at 34 minutes.
Oh, my goodness gracious.
We aim for 20, just so you know. We have time. We could, we're almost at a second video's length.
It's me.
So, we could, if you wanted to, but I think we should wrap it up.
Yeah, we wrap it up. I'm done.
It was a good conversation. Thomas, I really appreciate you being here because I feel like I'm paying attention. Yeah. And usually I'm running the stream and reading comments and stuff, and now I don't have to do that. So thank you. We can wrap it up.
Well, I'm done.
Wrap it up, and
I'm done.
We might do a part 2.
We could do a part 2 later this week if time allows.
For you guys to know, we do our Wednesday night Old Testament University is what we're calling it right now, where we're doing a series Wednesday nights live on YouTube, and this week Facebook as well, where Jeff is going to be covering
David and Goliath
this week. So we do this with our home group, so you can join a group and watch, or you can just watch it yourself at home. It's about a 30-minute study, and this week is David and Goliath. We have our church services, whether in person or online, if you want to join us, and that's it.
That's it.
We do this every Tuesday at noon, just to be able to bring a conversation, and just like you saw earlier, if you have a question, feel free to share it, and we'll discuss it more.
Yep.
So, well, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. If you like the message and you think it might be good for someone, feel free to share it with other people. But that's all we have. So we'll see you next week.